So welcome everybody. I'm Sarah Ockwell-Smith. Today I want to talk about understanding your newborn sleep, what every parent, every carer needs to know about sleep between 0 and 3 months. So whether you're joining when you're pregnant, when you've got a bump, or whether you've got a newborn in your arms, I'm going to talk about everything that's the most important to understand about sleep between 0 and 3 months. So let me just quickly come back and give you an idea, a bit of an overview of what I'm going to be talking about today. So what I'm going to do first of all is to talk about the common problems that parents of newborns struggle with when it comes to their child's sleep. We're going to talk a little bit about the myths and misconceptions that society has around infant sleep. Then what I'll do after that is give you a few tips to help ensure that your baby's sleep and that your sleep is as good as possible. And my aim is also to leave 10 minutes at the end in order to give you time to ask a few questions. So if you're new to Zoom, what you'll notice is there is a Q&A box. If you have a question, do pop your question in there and I'll have a look through at the end. However, I would say I have 500 of you joining me today, so please don't be upset if I don't answer your question, but I'll give it a go at the end and see how many we have. So pop it in the Q&A box, hold on a bit until we go through the webinar, and then I'll answer them towards the end. Okay, let's pop you back to the screen. So if I was in a room with you, if I was at a baby show, or if you had come to one of my workshops, you know, the time when we could all meet together in a big group, what I would ordinarily do is start off by going around the room and saying, okay, so what issues do parents of newborn babies struggle with the most? And whether it's people coming with a bump or somebody with a baby, we always get the same answers. So the first answer is, wow, they wake up so much. I knew that they wouldn't sleep through the night, but I didn't realize they'd be waking every 40 minutes. Needing to feed to sleep. So whether we're talking naps or whether we're talking nights, the fact that, you know, my baby's only really happy to sleep if they're being fed. This one's particularly true if you're breastfeeding. So a lot of parents say, I'm really worried that I'm creating some sort of a sleep association and feeding to sleep is causing them to wake up so much. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. The fact that they don't seem to know the difference between night and day, so their sleep is just the same, whether it's daytime or nighttime, there's no discernible difference. And a lot of parents are worried, should I be teaching them the difference somehow to make them sleep more like me at night? The fact that they can't self-soothe or can't self-settle, so they need you really every time they wake up, otherwise they get really upset and start to cry. So when should you expect them to be able to start to settle themselves, and what maybe would that look like over the next few months and years? Frequent night feeds, and very often you may find that they will actually feed more often at night than during the day, and a lot of parents worry about that too. Erratic or no routines, particularly when it comes to nap times, so there's no predictability over when they sleep, or your baby is not doing what the books or the websites or the courses or whoever tells you that babies of this age should be doing when it comes to nap times. And then you've got the unhappy babies. So we've got colic and crying, or just really unsettled babies. And how do we calm them down? And finally, they are only happy to sleep when they're being held. So whether that's naps or nights, the fact that they sleep so much better in your arms, but don't sleep very well when you put them down. So these are the main ideas I'm going to be talking about today. So why do we struggle so much with our sleep? So I'm totally with you. I'm a mum of 4. Mine are all teenagers now, so it's a whole other sleep issue. But I absolutely remember the newborn days and the lack of sleep with my 4. And before we talk about how to improve baby sleep, it's so important that we understand why it is so very different to our own. So we need to understand the causes of sleep issues before we even begin to think about how we can make it better. And this is something so many popular sleep training techniques or schedules or programs or courses online don't do. It's not looking for the deeper understanding and the causes and changing our expectations. In our society, whatever it is we're looking at, we have a very quick fix approach. We're particularly when we're exhausted, we're looking for, how can I improve this? But what we need to do is look at, why is it like this? Because once we understand the why is it like this, everything is different. So why is infant sleep so different to adult sleep? Well, the first reason is they have such short sleep cycles. So the thing that we need to understand about sleep is nobody goes to sleep and stays asleep. Sleep isn't some sort of constant state that we're in for 8 hours a night without any change. What happens is, if you look at my picture on the side of the screen here, we start off awake and then we get drowsy, or something known as alpha state. If any of you did hypnobirthing or mindfulness or yoga or something like that, you'll recognize a state of deep relaxation. So we go through this deep relaxation where we become less and less aware of the world, and we enter into the first stage of sleep, or stage 1 sleep, which is a really drowsy state, very light sleep state. That drops into stage 2 and then stage 3. And this is combined something called non-REM or NREM sleep. But the sleep basically gets deeper the more we get into that stage. And then we're having a bit of REM sleep, or rapid eye movement sleep, also called paradoxical sleep, where our body is very, very still, but our brain is really active. And this is the state of dreaming. It's the state of converting short-term to long-term memories. It's a state where your baby's brain is processing everything that's happening during the day and growing. And at the end of that, we've finished a cycle. So for adults, our sleep cycles are about 1.5 hours to 2 hours long. For your baby, for your newborn baby, they're like 40-45 minutes. So they're much, much shorter. Or in other words, they have at least 2, if not 3 sleep cycles for every 1 sleep cycle you have. Now, the issue here is at the end of a sleep cycle, there's a few different things that can happen. And I like to imagine it like a Monopoly board. And the end of a sleep cycle is the go part, where you can either stop at go, collect your £200, or carry on rounds past the £200 point. So at the end of a sleep cycle, maybe a new sleep cycle could start immediately. And then this is when we mistakenly believe that we've had lots of deep sleep, that we've had this big solid chunk of sleep. We haven't. We've just connected 2 or 3 or more sleep cycles, and it feels like we've had one long chunk of sleep. But we have actually had individual sleep cycles with different levels of sleep. So generally that would happen if everything is great in our environment, we're not worried about anything, we don't feel ill, we don't feel discomfort. Or we may wake at the end of a sleep cycle, and maybe there's nothing wrong. You know, we don't know why we've woken, and we just go back to sleep again. This will happen to you a lot in your pre-baby days when you could sleep, and you would just wake up for, you know, it would feel like maybe 20-30 seconds, and maybe you'd have a vague recollection in the morning that you'd woken, but you went back to sleep so quickly, and you were probably still in that alpha, that relaxation state when it happened. You know, this often happens. I take a glass of water to bed with me at night, and I wake up in the morning and my glass of water is very often empty. So I know I've woken and had a drink, but I don't really have a conscious memory about it because I was in that really deep drowsy state. Or maybe we would wake up and there's something wrong. So maybe we're in pain. Maybe we need to go to the toilet. Maybe we're hot, maybe we're cold, maybe we're uncomfortable. There's something wrong with our pillow or our duvet. Maybe our partner's snoring, you know, maybe the dog's barking. Maybe there's something else that's happened. I don't know. Maybe you have a dentist appointment tomorrow and you're nervous about it, or a job interview that you're anxious about. Or maybe you're going on holiday and you're excited. Maybe you watched a horror film and you're scared. So there could be something that's not right in our minds or in our environment. And as an adult, what we need to do is to fix that. So we would open windows, close windows. We would do some deep breathing. We would tell ourselves that monsters don't exist. Whatever it is, we could fix that. We could take some paracetamol, some painkillers. We could fix whatever the problem is, and hopefully a new sleep cycle would start. Although we've all experienced times when it's really difficult to start to sleep again, you know, maybe because we're in pain, maybe because we're ill, maybe because we're so anxious or excited about something. So even as adults, we still struggle to connect sleep cycles sometimes. So with our babies, particularly with our newborns, this is maybe one of the top issues of all of the sleep concerns that we have. So there's this bit of an idea around, if you go onto Instagram or social media and you're looking for ways to improve your baby's sleep, I guarantee within a couple of minutes, you'll come across the phrase self-soothing or self-settling. And it's touted like the holy grail of getting babies to sleep. Like if you teach your baby to self-soothe or to self-settle, then they will sleep better, or they will be more independent. They won't need you. So the idea is, if we teach them how to sleep independently, they won't need us. And it sounds great, doesn't it? You know, it sounds so simple. And along with this comes you must avoid holding, cuddling them to sleep or feeding them to sleep, because that will inhibit self-settling. And it sounds such a great and simple idea, but it is completely and utterly wrong. Babies cannot self-soothe. You cannot teach them to self-soothe. Let's have a quick look at the table that I've put up here. So as an adult, if we wake and we're too hot, we can adjust our covers, we can open windows, we can turn on a fan. What can your baby do? Can they do any of that? All they can do is cry for your attention to say, help, I need you to come and externally regulate me because I'm too hot. What if they're too cold? Well, we can add covers, we can close windows, we can adjust our heating. What can our babies do? They can cry for your help. What if we're uncomfortable? What if the pillow's wrong? What if our duvet is wrong? What if we just, I don't know, found ourselves in a really uncomfortable position? We can readjust ourselves. What can our babies do? Again, they can cry for your help. If we need the toilet, now this is the one thing they can do without us. We can go to the toilet and we can sort ourselves out afterwards. They can go to the toilet, but then they can cry because they have a soiled nappy. Although not all babies do that. You know, my babies actually didn't seem to be bothered that they were in a soiled nappy, but for some it really upsets them, particularly if they have nappy rash and it is painful. What if we need a drink? Well, we could get a glass of water. What do? They cry for your help. If we're hungry, we can get something to eat. It doesn't often happen for adults at night. Very often happens for babies. What do? They cry for our help. If we're in pain, we take the medication. What do? They cry for our help. If we're not tired because we've tried to go to bed before we're ready, what do? We read a book, we distract ourselves, we count sheep, we do some meditation. What do? They cry for our help. If we hear an unexpected noise, we could check where it is, we can investigate, we could stop the noise. They cry for our help. And later on, I'm going to talk about something called the fourth trimester and how their world has changed so much. This is really important here. If the room is too light or too dark, we can close curtains, turn on lamps, turn off lamps, open curtains. They can't do any of that. They cry for our help. If they're scared of something, we can talk to ourselves. We can rationalize. We can say, don't be silly. Monsters don't exist. There's no mass murderer in your home. It's okay. You know, your partner's only gone to get a drink. They've not left you forever. What do? They cry for our help. You know, I'm not going to keep talking through this, but basically you get the idea that babies are neurologically, physiologically, psychologically incapable of self-soothing or self-settling issues that happen in that go place, or what I call the danger zone, in that place where sleep cycles connect, where you've finished a sleep cycle and you're coming up into a sort of a very light level of sleep or that state of drowsiness. If something is wrong in the environment or something is wrong in their bodies, if they're in pain or if there's discomfort, what are they going to do? Well, they can't soothe it themselves. They cannot get up and go to your kitchen and get a drink. They cannot take the medication. They cannot make themselves a bottle and feed it to them themselves. They can't climb out of their crib and attach to your breast and breastfeed. You know, they need you to do all of that. So what happens when we do teach them to self-soothe or self-settle with sleep training? What we're actually doing is teaching them to be quiet. It doesn't resolve any of the underlying issues. All we're doing is, through a process of classical conditioning, is we're basically saying, if you're crying, then I'm not going to quite meet your needs. I'm not going to pick you up. I'm not going to feed you. I'm not going to, you know, do what it is you truly need. So through a process of learned helplessness, that's the psychological phrase for it, they eventually learn there is no point in me crying. Now, I genuinely do not believe there is any parent in this world, if they understood how most sleep training that focuses on self-soothing or self-settling works, I don't think they would do it. But we're kind of sold a lie, the idea that teach your baby to self-soothe or self-settle and you'll get better sleep. But we can't teach that. We can just teach them to be quiet. When does it develop? Well, as they grow, as they become more sort of manually dexterous and they can lift up things and move things and they're more independent, they can go and grab things by themselves from the kitchen, they can do the mindfulness and the deep breathing and the reassuring, the self-talk that we can do. Realistically, when would I expect it? This is the point, I think, at this webinar that everybody gets really scared when I say school age, 4 years plus maybe. It doesn't mean that you're going to be getting up every 45 minutes until your child is 4, because actually what you tend to find is sleep cycles lengthen as they get older. So there's less time for them to go through that danger zone, that go 200-pound part of the Monopoly board. But also they do have, some skills that you could put them to bed with a beaker of water and they may have a drink of that themselves. So what our goal as parents should be is not to teach self-soothing or self-settling. We know we can't teach it. It's to teach, well, not teach anything really, to teach them that we're always there through being responsive, because we know from research that the more nurturing we are, the more we meet their needs now, the more likely they are to be able to regulate their emotions as they grow. So it's like literally the opposite of what society tells us. The more we're there for them, the more we comfort them, the more we hug them, the more we feed them now, the more likely they are to be better at sleep and independent of sleep when they're older. So at this point, normally people say to me, but my baby does self-soothe. You know, they will often sleep for 3 hours. So that means they've gone through maybe 5 sleep cycles, but they've connected them independently. So surely that means they are self-soothing or self-settling. Absolutely not. What it means is that your baby, when they've come through that danger zone or that monopoly ball part, everything's okay. There's nothing wrong in the environment. They're not hot, they're not cold. The noises are okay. They don't feel scared. They're not in pain. They're not thirsty. Everything is okay. So probably you've just been really lucky. A lot of sleep is genetic. So it's, you know, the luck of the genetic draw. Maybe you've actually worked on the environment and you've managed to kind of nail it, maybe consciously, maybe subconsciously. But they're not self-soothing or self-settling, I can promise you that. There is nothing to soothe and nothing to settle, so they haven't woken. And it's really important that we understand the differences between that. All right, let's pop on to the next one. What else do we struggle with? Why is sleep so different? So we all have a body clock. So it comes from the Latin circa, which means circular, and diem, which means day. So it gives us the word circadian. So a circadian rhythm is how our bodies respond to the natural sort of light and dark cycles. It's our internal body clock. So we would call them body clocks. And what happens is in the morning at sunrise, which at the moment I'm in the UK is about 5:30, 6 o'clock-ish. So as the sun starts to rise, the levels of light increase, but not just light, also the levels of warmth, of heat increase. And our body responds to the light and responds to the warmth by switching off the production of something called melatonin. So melatonin is the hormone of sleep. It's what helps us to sleep at night. And in the daytime, we don't want to be sleepy. So instead, we release something called cortisol. So when it's light, when it's warm, we're releasing more cortisol because it keeps us awake and alert and, you know, ready for the day. If you flip around to the other side of the clock, so we're getting to kind of, at the moment, 7 or 8 p.m.-ish as the sun starts to set. So you may not see a difference in light levels, but the actual color, the wavelength of the light would change more towards the kind of the orangey red spectrum later in the evening. But what happens there is the lighting levels drop and the wavelength of the light changes from the blue light that we have in the daytime. I know it doesn't look blue, it looks white, but the bluer color spectrum of bright light towards the redder color spectrum of dim light. And as the light levels fall and as the temperature levels fall, our bodies are aware that nighttime is happening and we're ready for sleep. So our cortisol levels start to dial down and we start to release more melatonin, which is the hormone of sleep. And this inbuilt clock helps us to sleep and helps us to be ready for the day. Even if we didn't have a clock, we would still sleep at night and be awake during the day. And as an adult, there are a few things that we do to mess up our circadian rhythms, things like foreign travel with jet lag, things like being awake really late at night with artificial lights, shift work, those sorts of things. So but our circadian rhythms, our body clocks are really mature, they can cope with it. But for our babies' circadian rhythms, they don't mature until, again, nearest school age. They're kind of like owls at around about school age. But what's really interesting is when you're pregnant, your baby obviously isn't exposed to light and warmth of the outdoor world. So they get circadian rhythms, they get that melatonin and that cortisol via the placenta. So when you're pregnant, your baby will have a circadian rhythm, but it's yours. They're kind of borrowing it while you're pregnant. So obviously when they're born, this stops. They don't get that melatonin and cortisol crossing through the placenta anymore. Instead, they're kind of on their own. And we know from research, it takes somewhere between sort of 10 and 14 weeks for a circadian rhythm to really start functioning well. So the question that I'm often asked is, my baby doesn't seem to know the difference between night and day. Absolutely not. It's biological. The circadian rhythms in the newborn period are just not functioning like adults. They literally do not know that night is time to sleep and day is time to be awake, because those chemicals are not being secreted in their bodies like yours yet. So all of this, you've got to teach them the difference between night and day. Absolute waste of time. It's entirely developmental and biological. If it makes you feel better to try to teach them day and night, then go for it. But physiologically, it won't have a difference on their body. Although what we can do is make sure that we keep things dark at night and light in the day, so that when it starts functioning, that obviously their bodies will respond to the light and the dark. But aiming to teach them the difference between night and day in the newborn period is utterly futile. So why else is it different? In our society, in Western society, and I'm talking to you from the UK, but here I would count places like America, the USA, Canada, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, Europe. We really misunderstand the development of independence. Our society is very patriarchal. It's very set up to, it's not very nurturing, basically, is what I'm trying to say. We're very much set up to try to leave our babies as quickly as possible, get back into the world of work, and encourage independence, encourage them to be happy away from you. And it starts from birth. You know, I remember when I had my firstborn, I was in the hospital and he had his little fishbowl glass crib next to me, and I kept picking him up to cuddle him because my instincts were just saying, pick him up, cuddle him. And there was one midwife who every time she saw me would say, oh, you're making a rod for your own back there, you need to put him down, otherwise he'll only sleep when you're holding him. But you know, this sort of phrasing, this sort of terms, we hear them all the time, making a rod for your own back. You know, if you hold them all the time, you're always going to need to hold them, or you're spoiling them. And then we're asked by random strangers in the supermarket, are they a good baby? What they mean by are they a good baby is, do they sleep lots and do they sleep out of your arms? So is it somehow bad if our babies need to sleep in our arms? You know, this is the culture we live in, and it completely and utterly misunderstands infant psychology and the development of independence. So for this, we have a sort of a brief flick back 70 years or 80 years, I think, even now, to the end of the Second World War and the work of John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth, and the absolutely groundbreaking research into how attachment and independence forms. So an infant, and by infant, I mean definitely under 3 years of age, they really need the attachment to their parents, what we call the secure base. So we are known as the secure base. And basically, when they're in contact with us, they feel safe, they feel secure. And as they grow, as they develop physically, they will start to explore the world, but we are always their home. We are always the secure base for them. And they do what we call proximity maintenance. So they will always try to seek to be close to us. And if they're away from us, we get separation distress, or what many of us know with babies that comes in around about 9 to 12 months is something called separation anxiety. So separation anxiety happens when the babies are very concerned that they don't feel close to us. It's like, oh my goodness, where have they gone? Even if you've gone to get a cup of coffee or gone to go to the loo, for them, it's like you've abandoned them. And they will cry and cry and cry because they're seeking to maintain proximity. And what we know from research is the best way to build a secure, confident, independent older child and adult is to allow that proximity, is to allow that attachment in infancy. So I'm not saying you must hold your baby all the time. If your baby is happy sleeping in a pram, in a crib, in a cot, then that's great. The key is responding to their needs. So if they need to be put down and to sleep independently, you're being responsive by recognizing and acknowledging that. But if they need to be in your arms, the responsive thing to do there would be to pick them up. So it's not wrong that they sleep alone. It's not wrong that they sleep in a crib. It's not wrong that they sleep in a Moses basket. It's not wrong that they sleep in a pram. It's all about responding to their needs. If they're happy like that, then that is wonderful and you're really lucky, and it may not last. So embrace it while it happens. It's all about responding to their needs. So if they're unhappy being alone, it's all about picking them up and maintaining that proximity, because we know in the future, the more responsive we are to their needs now, the more confident and independent they will be as they grow. And into adulthood, there's so much research onto attachment styles and how it impacts our future relationships, you know, romantic relationships, friendships, and things like that. Then even, you know, our physical and our emotional health. So I'm going to whiz through a couple more and then I'm going to come back and talk to you. We really misunderstand the purpose of night wakes. We seem to think in our society that waking up lots is a bad thing. But for newborns, the age you're all tuning in with, it's one of the most important things that can happen to them to keep them safe against sudden infant death syndrome, or SIDS, or some people know this as cot death. So what we actually really want from newborn sleep is we want them to sleep in short chunks. And we want them to be easily rousable if something is wrong. So by something, well, that could be they have something covering their face, or it could be that something's happening internally to them. So the peak risk of SIDS happens in the first 3 to 4 months of life. So at least the first 12 weeks. And it really, if you look at my chart here, it starts to really diminish after 6 months. So the guidelines or the advice is that babies should have all of their sleep in the same room as us for the first 6 months. Now, there's a couple of misconceptions here that people don't understand. When I say all of their sleep, I mean all of their sleep. I mean daytime and nighttime, so naps as well as night. And I don't think this is made clear enough in SIDS guidance. The reason that we need to be in the same room as them all of the time isn't necessarily so we're alert if something happens to them. It's because of something known as gaseous exchange. So our very breathing, when we're exhaling carbon dioxide and the levels of gas change in the environment, it actually triggers our babies to breathe. And this, you know, the presence of us and the change in levels of carbon dioxide and oxygen in the close proximity to the baby really helps them to protect them against SIDS. It's one of the things, you know, there are other things that protect against SIDS, and I'm not going to go into them now because it's not necessarily about sleep. We'll do a little bit more when I talk about what if you share a bed with your baby. But that understanding that being in the same room is so, so important. And obviously I know a lot of people buy monitors and stuff like that, like you can have breathing monitors, apnea monitors and stuff like that, but they give a false sense of reassurance, because what often they will do is they will alert you after the baby has stopped breathing, but also they don't give the protection of you being in the same room. So you being in a different room while your baby sleeps, even if you have a monitor, is not the same as you being in the same room in terms of protecting them against SIDS. It's that proximity to them, the same room, that's so important. So I'm talking naps as well as night sleep as well. And the recommendation is to at least 6 months. That doesn't mean that you need to move them out of your room at 6 months. It just means that's the earliest that you should consider it. Okay, let me pop through a couple more and I'll come back and just double check if there's any urgent questions about the content. So the idea of the 4th trimester is such an important one to understand when you're pregnant or you have a newborn. If we think about being pregnant and baby inside the uterus and think about what their environment is like for them. So it's always dark. You know, if you're sunbathing in bright sunlight, and maybe that could maybe change the tinge of us slightly, but generally speaking, it's dark. And remember, they've not got the functioning circadian rhythm of their own. The sounds are kind of fairly, they're muffled if they're outside sounds, but there's constant sounds from the inside of your body. So it's always noisy. There's never no noise, but there's no kind of loud noises all of a sudden, but there's also never silence. They're constantly held at body temperature. They don't know what it's like to be hot or cold. They don't know what it's like to be hungry or thirsty, because there's, you know, literally nutrition on tap. They're in a very confined space, particularly at the end of your pregnancy. You imagine, you know, they can't move anything because there's the warm, snug walls of the uterus all around them. So they've never been able to sort of, at the end of pregnancy anyway, to feel lots of space around them. Obviously, they're aquatic. They're in warm water all of the time. So this is slightly wrong. It shouldn't be inability to smell. They can smell, of course, but they can't smell because they're in water. But obviously the senses are there. And they're constantly held. They're in 24/7 physical contact with the mum. They've never been alone. They're naked. They've never had clothes on them. Everything they touch is soft and warm. So now think about what happens when they're born. So all of a sudden they're born into light. You know, the first time they experience light was seconds after they're born. And then they experience the difference between light and dark and being able to see. And, you know, that's fascinating if you learn about how a newborn's eyesight develops.
for the first time, they hear really loud noises, but also then they hear silence. And that can be really freaky. They have fluctuating temperatures. They know what it's like to be hot or cold, and they didn't have that before. They now know what it's like to be hungry or thirsty, and they didn't have that before. All of a sudden, there's all this space around them. Or if they're hitting something, it might be hard, like it might be a cot bar next to them or something, or the side of a pram or a stroller. They're in air for the first time. They're breathing for the first time. And how strange that is to lose the constant warm water on their skin. All of the different smells, you know, so the smell of your deodorant, the smell of somebody's perfume, the smell of food cooking. They've not had that before. Dramatically reduced contact. Remember, they were held constantly. So even if it feels like you're constantly holding your baby, and maybe you hold them for 4 hours every day, then, you know, that there's a reduction in like 8 hours of them being held just in a daytime, let alone at night. And their clothes, how freaky is that to have clothes on and nappies on, and, you know, all of these things that could dig in or be scratchy or something like that. And lots of what they can touch can be hard and can be cold rather than soft and warm. If we think of this enormous transition that they've made instantly from the moment of birth, it blows my mind at how different it is. And then we can understand, while babies experience things like colic, and colic is not a medical condition. People think it is. Colic is just a term used for babies who cry a lot. So they're crying for more than 3 hours a day, for more than 3 days a week, for more than 3 weeks. I think that the definition is. But colic doesn't tell us why they're crying. It isn't a medical condition. It isn't a diagnosis like it might be in like horses or something. It's basically, this baby is really unhappy. I think looking at this transition from womb to world gives us so many clues as to why they may be unhappy. What else do we get wrong? We really misunderstand the purpose of night feeds. So whether you're breast or bottle feeding, they're not just about hunger. So, you know, you see lots of schedules that are talking about feeding babies up to stop them waking because they're being hungry. But night feeds, breast or bottle feeding, are about so much more than hunger. They are about hunger, of course. They're also about thirst. They're also about having just a bit of a dry mouth. You know, when you or I may take a sip of water in the night, more likely if you've got air conditioning or central heating. It's about reconnection. It's about maintaining that proximity of physical comfort. It's about emotional comfort and releasing oxytocin, this chemical that helps us, it's the hormone of love that helps us to feel calm and relaxed and connected. It's about building your supply if you're breastfeeding. So important to feed regularly day and night if you're breastfeeding. So many at times I come across parents who have really struggled to breastfeed and have had to stop because of low supply, because they were trying to somehow restrict the feeds or trying to feed them on a sort of a routine or a schedule. But this constant cluster feeding, the, you know, loads and loads and loads of feeds, little feeds all together, is so important to get the supply up, because in the early days breastfeeding works on a supply and demand basis. It's also about physical comfort. When we are feeding, what you're doing as a baby is, when your baby's born, they're very cone-headed, their heads all squished up, and all the plates of their skull gently move so they get a nice round head over the first few weeks of life. And the process of sucking, that motion that pulls, if you do it, you pull your jaw, you'll actually feel it pulling down on here. So that suckling is actually really important to resolve their molding post-birth as well. It's not just about the actual feeding motion. So a lot of people think, well, you know, they're not feeding, they're comfort sucking. Comfort sucking is so important physiologically and emotionally. And again, we really seem to misunderstand that. It's never a bad habit to feed. It is never, ever wrong to feed to sleep. It's not a negative association. It's like the norm. However you're feeding, if you watch any other mammal, the feeding to sleep is the biological norm. It's the human norm. It's the mammalian norm. So it's really important to understand that feeding isn't replaced by solids. What we know from research actually is weaning babies onto solid foods at around about 6 months actually makes sleep worse temporarily. If you think of all the change, and change makes sleep worse. If you're breastfeeding, change into formula probably won't help. If you're formula feeding, change into hungry baby milk probably won't help, because it's not hunger that's the issue. And dummies and pacifiers, you know, may mean that they don't feed so much. If you're breastfeeding, this could be an issue with supply. But actually, very often what I tend to find is that dummies and pacifiers can actually cause a whole heap of issues with sleep, because they fall out and babies can't put them back in themselves. So you may be just changing to a different issue. But
I shouldn't have said different issue, because feeding to sleep is normal. It is not problematic. It is not a bad habit. I've worked with thousands of people who still feed their babies to sleep, and now they're older, they have a full night's sleep. Please don't be scared of it. It is the mammalian human physiological norm. So what else do we do wrong regarding sleep? We seem to think in our society that sleep gets better the older a baby gets. So if you imagine you could plot a chart, and at the very bottom, and like one side is like good sleep, bad sleep, and here is the age. With newborns, I think we expect them to sleep poorly. I think we expect them to need us lots, and I think we expect them to wake lots and be very unpredictable. But as they get older, we seem to expect the trajectory to go like this, nice upward smooth trajectory. But unfortunately, life is not like that. So what you do find is it will get better. In about 3 months, sleep is pretty good actually. And then you get a big dip at like 4 months, like riding a roller coaster, and it tends to get a little bit better, and then you wean onto solids, and then you have another dip, and then maybe you get a couple of months of it being a bit better, and then separation anxiety comes, and then it nosedives hugely. And we know actually the worst sleep in the whole of the first year happens between 9 and 12 months with that relation to separation anxiety, when they realize you and they are separate beings, so they get a whole heap of anxiety anytime they're not in contact with you. So it's really important to understand that infant sleep is not like that. Infant sleep is more of a roller coaster, hence my image of a roller coaster. I can't tell you the amount of people who email me and say, Sarah, please, I need sleep. I need help. I must be doing something wrong. My baby slept really well until like 3 or 4 months old. And now I don't know what I'm doing wrong, but everything's gone wrong. Please help. But you're not doing anything wrong. This is normal sleep. It's like a roller coaster. It's up and down. 4 months, 6 months, 9 months, 10 months. These are the common times for it to nosedive. You have not done anything wrong. And please don't let anybody convince you otherwise. I think this is the last slide, and I'll come back and talk to you for a bit. So it's really important with sleep that we look, are there any underlying physical or medical issues? So if you think, okay, I understand babies wake lots and colic happens and stuff, but my baby seems to be like the other side of normal, like this seems to be much, much worse than others. So here we want to be looking for any physical or medical issues. And I would absolutely recommend going to speak to your family physician or doctor here. So you're looking at things like reflux. Actually, reflux is really normal for babies because their sphincters aren't developed fully. So spitting up is utterly normal, but there is something called gastroesophageal reflux disease, which is an entirely different. This is like your sort of your exorcist style spitting up and stuff like that. That's not normal. So that I'm not going to go through all of the symptoms of gastroesophageal reflux disease in babies now, but do look into it. It's beyond the norm of your little bit of spitting up and sort of that you'll smell things on their breath. They might have a hoarse cough. They seem to be very uncomfortable. But it's more than like regular normal reflux. Maybe there are allergies at play, so something like cow's milk protein allergy. If you pop that into Google, you'll find lots of information there. Maybe they're physically discomfort because of their skin. Maybe they have something like eczema, which obviously if your skin is dry and itchy, or there's something else happening there, that can definitely cause impact with sleep. Torticollis is just the medical term for having a stiff neck, which can happen during birth if you, depending on the way they were laying when they were born, if you had a really long labour, if they were born with forceps or ventouse or something like that, it could be. You will often find some babies have a slight flattening on one side of their head because they won't turn their head to the other side, or maybe if you're breastfeeding, you'll find that they favour much more being on one side than the other, or if you're laying down, you'll find that their head is normally turn one side. That could be an issue that there's some tightness or stiffness, and obviously when they're sleeping that could be uncomfortable. So if you do think that's the case, then again have a chat with your doctor about seeing a physiotherapist or speak with somebody like an osteopath. What else could be an issue? So microbiome issues. This is your gut flora. This could be an issue if your baby was born by C-section, because we know that babies when they're born vaginally, it changes their microbiome. And obviously with the sterile birth of a C-section, they don't get that vaginal microbiota colonizing their stomach quite so much. Could also be an issue if there are antibiotics or antifungals. So maybe if you're group B strep positive, or maybe if you have thrush afterwards and antifungals, or maybe if there are antibiotics for, infected belly button or something like that. then you could look into the microbiome. So much research, if you Google this microbiome for babies, basically if the gut flora is not optimal, it could cause them some gastrointestinal discomfort. There is some research that happened a few years ago linking colic with changed microbiome, and not in babies but with adults there is more and more research looking at the microbiome and how it impacts sleep, particularly the synthesis of melatonin. So definitely something worth researching, and maybe looking into exploring the idea of probiotics as well. We also know that breastfeeding changes the microbiome and has a protective impact, whereas formula feeding babies have a different microbiome than a breastfed baby. So lots of research there. Again, don't have time to cover it here, but do have a little read about that. And the last thing, but maybe actually I would say the most importantly, I don't know why I put it last, it probably should have come first, is feeding issues. So it doesn't matter how you're feeding your baby. There is a misconception that this can only impact breastfed babies, but we're looking at things like how they're latching onto the nipple or how they're latching onto the bottle. If they have a tongue tie or something like this, where the part that holds your tongue down to the bottom of your mouth sometimes is a bit too tight, so they can't move their tongues properly to get the milk in. They can't sort of splay their lips properly, so they tend to work really hard to get the milk, taking a lot of air, and they get really tired because it's such hard work, but they're not satiated with enough milk, and they also get very windy. So my recommendation there would be to have a chat with a breastfeeding counsellor or a lactation consultant, somebody who specialises in infant feeding. So not just a friend or somebody, or maybe if you've had a health visitor or midwife, have a quick look, unless they're a specialist. So breastfeeding counsellor or a lactation consultant, it doesn't matter if you're formula feeding or breastfeeding, they will help both of you, particularly if tongue tie is the issue. But this can really impact on colic and reflux and difficult sleep. Okay, let's come back to you while I have a quick look to see if there's any questions that are urgent while we go through. So a couple of questions about circadian rhythm. Are there any patterns to baby sleep behaviours depending on what time of the year they're born? Not really. Obviously, depending on the time of year you're in, wherever you live in the world, that will change as well. Yes, so they will slowly adapt just like we do, but not really huge differences. It tends to, there's research not looking at babies, but looking at toddlers. So what we know for toddlers is that their melatonin starts to rise on average at around about between 7:30 and 8 p.m. And that actually follows the year round. There's not really a change in that. But what's really important later when I talk about the environment is actually considering the impact of light and dark at bedtime, whatever time of the year it is. I'm going to come back now. See, the questions are much more questions to ask at the end rather than content. So what can help with newborn sleep? So the most important thing about being a parent of a newborn, and actually a baby of any age or a toddler, is that we have realistic expectations. Expectations are the enemies of parents. Our expectations when it comes to sleep leave us feeling like we're a failure, like there's something wrong with our babies, like we've done something wrong. And like I said at the beginning, it's not us, it's not our babies, it's the society we live in. So we must start with having some knowledge of infant sleep to understand night waking is common, normal, and protective against SIDS. It's a good thing. Erratic short naps with no real routine are common and normal in the newborn period. Feeding to sleep is the human biological norm. It's the mammalian norm. It doesn't matter how you're feeding. Babies can't self-soothe, and we can't teach them. All we can do is teach them to be quiet. Before independence must always be dependence. So you can't make a baby independent if they haven't first experienced the safety and security of being dependent on you. And there's a massive transition from the uterus to the world, from womb to world. And it, of course, takes time for them to adjust. And it takes until around 4 months for the circadian rhythm to function well, but even later, so about 4 years for it to function like us as an adult. So what can we do to help? The best thing I can suggest to you at the moment is keep those expectations in check. But there are a few little tweaks that you can do in the newborn period to take the edge off a little. So first of all, we want to think about the danger zone. Remember what happens at the end of a sleep cycle. So what can I do to help? Now here we want to think about the developing circadian rhythm, and we want to think about what the environment is like
for the best sleep. So remember what I said, melatonin responds to darkness and cool temperatures. So we want to think about the environment. We want the room as cool as possible. We make a mistake in sort of Western culture of making rooms warm and putting babies in less clothing, but actually it would be better to have the cooler environment and maybe put just, an extra layer like a vest on them or something. But that central heating and making rooms too warm has a real impact. So we want a room to be around sort of 17 to 19 degrees centigrade. I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit, I'm afraid, but a quick Google could tell you. What else do we want? We want to look at the lighting. So in not just at bedtime, but in the 2 hours in the run up to it, we want to keep everything dark. So in the summer, if it's light, I would absolutely 2 hours before your baby's bedtime, be going around and closing blinds and curtains. I know it's not great for us in the summer when we're loving the light, but to try and sort of get things dark so that when they go to sleep, their melatonin has had a chance to rise. And the flip side, we want to keep things in the daylight. I'll talk about that in a little bit as well. What else do we need to be aware of? Any light sources we use in the environment have a huge impact on sleep. What we know from research is any light that is on the red wavelength is significantly better than anything that is on the blue, purple, pink, green, or yellow, or white, which is an amalgamation of all colors wavelength. So if we're looking technically, anything that is 600 nanometers or higher is what we want to aim for. Anything lower than this, particularly blue, purple, green, white light, will inhibit the secretion of melatonin because our body misinterprets it as daylight. So anything in your house that has white light, blue light, purple light, green light, or even pink if it's quite purpley, will be problematic for your child's sleep. So have a look around your home and think, what lighting is my baby exposed to in the 2 hour run up to bedtime and overnight? So some of the biggest culprits are the light in our bathrooms. We have white halogen spots. They're really horrifically bad for sleep. In your baby's room, what color light bulb do you have in the ceiling, light fitting, or a lamp? What about things like monitors or plugins or something like that? If they have, often they'll come with a blue or a green light. These are so bad for sleep. So I'd suggest putting just some sticky tape over like a little light like that. If you've got something like a plug-in or a monitor or a room thermometer, if it is any color other than red, you really want to cover that light up. In your bathroom, don't put your main light on. Instead, use battery operated lights, keep them well away from babies, but battery operated lights or just gentle light sources or no light if that's possible, if it's safe enough. In their bedroom and in your living room, we want to keep any light sources on the orange or red color spectrum. So which means in your living room, lots of people ask me about Himalayan salt lamps. I have them. I think they're really pretty. They do not do magic. There is no magic juju woo-woo about them. They're just lumps of salt. They don't de-ionize or ionize or humidify or dehumidify the environment. They literally are just salt, but they're pretty and they filter the light a little bit. So I have those in my living room. I wouldn't have them in the bedroom though, because they are a poor natural filter of light. In the bedroom, the only light source I would have is red light. So I'm talking red light bulbs. I'm talking night lights that glow red. So it looks like you're growing marijuana or in a red light district, but who cares? Your neighbors think, what are they doing? Alternatively, you can buy light bulbs that are non-red red lights. They look kind of like a peachy warm white, but actually, if you looked at the nanometers, they're actually on the red wavelength. So up until a couple of years ago, the only one you could get of those was from NASA. It was really expensive. If you think, obviously they need to change lighting levels in a space station in space to help the circadian rhythms of astronauts. And they made one for parents, which was great, but it was so expensive. But now you can get them for like 15 to 20, 25 pounds. So any lighting your baby is exposed in the run up to bedtime and overnight, only red light or non-red red light. The other thing that really impacts here is like if you're using a screen on your phone, if you're night feeding and you've got your phone, that will have a massive impact on their sleep. So make sure you have a blue light filter on your phone and turn the brightness down as low as possible. What else? You want to make sure as comfortable as possible in their bedding and clothing with what they're wearing. So just making sure there's nothing scratchy, making sure, as they roll over, they're not getting caught in bedding or sleeping bags or something like that. What we also don't want to do is change things once they're asleep. So we don't want to try and move them rooms when they're asleep or put them down when they're asleep. So here comes that phrase that I hate, that put them down drowsy but awake. I do agree if they go to sleep in the place they're going to sleep rather than being put down. It will help, but it's quite tricky because babies like to fall asleep in arms. The easiest way with that is to sleep with them in arms, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, or to replicate that in arms feeling, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And finally, provide comfort cues that are reminiscent of the womb, in sounds, in smells, in touch. So in terms of sounds, then I would recommend either some white or pink or brown noise type things with heartbeats, or something called alpha music. I'm going to show you, I have a recording that's that helps here. I'll talk about that at the end. In terms of smell, well, it's just something that smells of you in the newborn period. So a lot of people, put muslins in their bra and then put them close to the baby, like make them as a sheet on a Moses basket or something. But also we want to try and keep that environment the same when they go to sleep as when they wake up, because we want to create an environment where no soothing is necessary. So how do we help the circadian rhythm develop? Well, we kind of don't really. It will happen naturally. But there are two things that we want to do until that happens, which is to keep daytimes light and nights dark. Natural light exposure in the morning as early as possible. So when you wake up and it's naturally light, get outside in the light or sit by a window. As much natural light exposure as possible. And actually, if it's winter and it's dark, you can actually use a blue light bulb here. That will also help. We want to have naps in natural light, so they may sleep better if you have blackout blinds or something over their stroller or their crib or something up their pram. But that will be at the expense of night, because you're confusing them. You're introducing a mini night in the daytime. What we really want is for the naps to happen in natural light. We want their bedrooms to be cool at night, because, the melatonin is released not just in response to light, but in temperature. That's hard in the summer, but I would absolutely be thinking about, can I invest in a mini aircon unit or a fan, or what else can I do to keep things cooler? Careful of lighting at bedtime and overnight. Aim for a rhythm, not a strict routine. They're not robots. Every day it's different from when we go to sleep. So the same for our babies, but aim for a rhythm rather than timings. And I need to just add a quick point here. There is absolutely zero evidence to support this bizarre idea of wake windows. I've been doing what I do for a long, long time. And about 3 or 4 years ago, I started to notice people talking about, oh, they should be awake for like no more than 3 hours or 4 hours or 2 hours or 1 hour. There is nothing to support this. I don't know where it came from, but if it works for you, great. Please don't try and think, why is my baby not following these wake windows? It's a bizarre thing. I don't know where it came from. It's not evidence-based. If it works for your baby, great. If it doesn't, please ignore it. And the same with really sort of rigid nap schedules. I don't have time to talk about nap timings, but later I'll talk about my book, which covers naps in detail. Don't be scared of attachment. Meeting their need doesn't make them needier. It grows brains. Meeting their needs now makes them less needy when they're older. I think we all know adults who are very needy or struggle with attachment. And if we look at the roots of their childhood, it probably starts there. Babies are very mum-centric naturally. It won't last forever. And I should add to there as well, if you're a two-dad family, then what you will often find is that babies will often have a stronger attachment with the primary carer. So if you have one dad home, one dad at work, then you'll probably find that the attachment is stronger with the one who's at home. This isn't a problem. It isn't a sign that they love them more than the other. It's no indicator of what that relationship will be like later on. It is just an indicator that they will have normally a strongest attachment with one person, who's usually the mum, but as I say, could be the other primary carer if it's two dads. It won't last forever. Please don't think you're doing anything wrong. They will naturally grow out of it. And if there comes a point, if you are not that primary attachment figure and you need to get your baby to sleep, please don't be scared of them crying. Crying isn't a problem if we are comforting, if we're holding them in our arms, if we're talking to them, if we're taking deep breaths and we're being calm ourselves. We know that a baby crying in the arms of a carer who loves them and is offering comfort has a different impact than a baby crying, say, on their own in a crib or a cot or something. Avoiding feeding to sleep doesn't mean that others will be able to do bedtime if you're a breastfeeding mum. It just will make it harder for you. It's not necessarily the breastfeeding that's the issue. It's the fact that you're the primary attachment figure. So don't fall into the mistake of thinking, if I can stop feeding to sleep, it will be easier. It won't. It will just be harder for you. Look into safe bed sharing. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Consider contact naps or carrying naps, so naps in arms. They're great to reinforce you having a rest. Baby wearing slings are like one of the best things that I can recommend for this age, because you have your hands free and then your baby's happy. And remember, they need to be in your room for all sleep until 6 months. So we wanted to replicate the uterus with sounds, with smells, with touch. If a great thing to do if your baby's really unhappy and crying and won't settle is to just go and have a really lovely deep warm bath with them, because it reintroduces that idea of the warmth and the wetness and the contact with you. Swaddling is quite good because it replicates being held. There are lots of safety implications with swaddling, which are covered in my book or you can find online. One of the key things is that they must only ever go down on their back when they're swaddled. You mustn't wrap tightly around their hips and their legs, just around here, and you mustn't wrap too tightly because that can inhibit breathing. And as soon as they start showing signs of being able to roll, stop swaddling them, and absolutely do not swaddle after 12 weeks because that can be really dangerous because of rolling. The other thing about swaddling is that if you didn't swaddle your baby from early on, don't introduce it later on. Want everything they wear into sleep with to be soft and warm. Having some massage to get that oxytocin can help, and having a predictable routine can really help for naps and nights. By a predictable routine, I don't mean doing things to the clock, I mean doing things in a certain order. So for instance, going to the bathroom, having a bath, putting a piece of music on, giving them a massage, putting their pajamas on. That's a routine. It doesn't have to be set to the clock. So bed sharing. I think all parents should be taught how to bed share safely. I really strongly disagree with a lot of health professionals who just warn parents to not do it at all. A few years ago, I spoke to 1,000 parents and said, how many of you bed shared and have lied to health professionals about it? And it was something like 60 or 70%. People bed share. They do it accidentally, or they do it and they lie about it. And when they lie about it, they don't get the information they need to do it as safely as possible. So safer bed sharing guidelines. Here, if you go on the internet and search the Safe Sleep 7, you'll find lots of information from the Lecce League. The Notre Dame University bed sharing guidelines are really good to follow as well. But the key with bed sharing is it needs to be planned. We don't ever want to accidentally fall asleep with our baby anywhere. That's really, really dangerous. And it must be in a bed, not a sofa, you know, or a nursing chair. That's really dangerous. So ideally, we want a breastfed baby who is born at term, who is well. There is evidence that formula-fed babies will sleep differently, but particularly formula-feeding mums will sleep normally in a different position. It's nothing like a slur on formula feeding. It's just, you know, physiologically, we know there's a difference in how both mum and baby sleep. So it's probably safer if you're formula feeding to use a co-sleeper crib, which is just like bed sharing. They're just in a crib with which is sides open onto your bed. Both parents, if you're in a two-parent family, should be non-smokers. You shouldn't have alcohol. You shouldn't have any medication causing drowsiness. So that doesn't necessarily mean, you know, recreational drugs. It could be, you know, maybe you're taking painkillers or hay fever medicine. No medical conditions causing you to sleep more deeply or be very obese, because that can impact how you sleep as well. We want to keep pillows and adult bedding away from the baby. You can see a picture here that's a great illustration of sleeping in what we call a C frame. So your arm is protecting the baby from the pillows, and the baby should be on the outside of the bed next to mum, not near dad or other siblings, because dad doesn't have the same inbuilt physiological protective mechanisms. Again, it's not a slur on dad, it's just biologically breastfeeding mums will sleep differently. Tie long hair back, make sure you've got no hanging tags on your night clothes. Be careful about your bed. It really needs to be firm only, and baby should be in a position here. So what's really interesting is if you look at places like Japan that have a really high bed sharing rate, they actually have one of the lowest SIDS rates. But it's because they kind of naturally will follow these guidelines that they would sleep on a futon, which is naturally harder. So it's not the bed sharing itself that is dangerous, it's bed sharing that isn't planned and not following the safety guidelines. And it is much, much safer to inform yourself of these and set up a safe environment if you feel drowsy than to accidentally fall asleep with your baby in your arms in your bed, or accidentally fall asleep with your baby in a chair. So what's the ultimate key? Being kind to yourself. You know, your baby's sleep, I can guarantee everybody asking me questions is normal. But how do we get through this? I've been through it 4 times. It is utterly exhausting. Our society is not set up to support parents. You know, there are major, major issues with the way that we support parents emotionally, practically, economically. We live in a culture that is basically demanding of parents to work like they don't have kids and parent like they don't have a job. But I think, you know, until we can change the society and the culture we live in, the way that I think we do that is by getting these realistic expectations out there as much as possible. What can we do in the meantime? So the little tips I've given you will help. How can you optimize your sleep as much as possible? Can you tag team if there are two of you? Are you deficient in any key nutrients? So for mums listening, this is really important, because postnatal, you know, your body's been through a lot. Is there anything you're deficient in that could be impacting your sleep? So common culprits here would be B vitamins and iron. So consider your nutrient status. How do you relax? You know, what do you do to relax? We seem to think that we've got babies, when we relax, we must make use of the time, we must tidy the house or meal prep or something, but we need to relax. It's, you know, almost view yourself as your family's car, and if you don't refuel it with petrol, you can't go anywhere, you can't do anything. Well, it's the same with you. If you don't refuel by relaxing, you know, sometimes doing nothing is the most important thing you can do. Do you have a support network? You know, I know this is so much harder in COVID, and my heart absolutely goes out to anybody who's had a baby over the last year and a half. But if you don't have a support network near you, can you create a virtual one? So I have two Facebook groups, Gentle Parenting UK and Gentle Parenting International. I'd love it if you come and join. Just say Sarah sent me if you want to come and join my groups. We're very supportive. There are charities and organisations that could help you there as well. But trying to find someone just to talk to, if it's not even practical support, somebody to listen actually is so important. Be kind to yourself. You allow yourself to be a beginner. Don't pressurize yourself to be great at this. And really lay back. You know, I shouldn't say this as a parenting author, and I'm going to talk about my book in a minute, but lay back on reading all of the things that tell you what you should be doing, and trying to listen to your heart a little bit more and just kind of chill out a little bit. Try to ignore comments from other people. You know, you're bombarded with comments. Don't drive yourself crazy with Googling what's wrong with my baby, because you will come up with all sorts of different answers that will completely erode your confidence. Really big one. This one really gets me. Do not have an app and chart your baby's sleep times unless, this is such an important caveat, it helps you to feel really happy, safe and secure. I tend to find that 9 out of 10 parents who chart their baby's sleep in an app, it makes them anxious, it makes them way worse than if they're a little bit more relaxed about it. What's the ultimate solution? I wish I could give you a magic answer here, but it's time and consistency. Your baby will sleep through the night. I absolutely promise you. I have 4 teenagers who are impossible to get up in the morning now, but just now they're just being a baby, sleeping like a baby. So where can you find more information? If you don't follow me already, I'm on Instagram, Sarah Ockwell-Smith, just my name. I do every other day something called Ask SOS, where you can submit a question and I post answers to people's questions. I talk about sleep a lot on there. I have 2 Facebook pages. One is Sarah Ockwell-Smith Author, where I tend to not talk about much sleep stuff, more about sort of toddler and behaviour stuff. But I do have a Facebook page for my Gentle Sleep book, where I post so much sleep information. I'm on Twitter as well, the baby expert. I'm also on TikTok, bizarrely now. My kids made me join as just Sarah Ockwell-Smith, my name. So if you want to look at some recommended products, like what light is a good one to use, if you go on my website, there's a recommended products page with lots of information on there about things that I'm not paid by anybody to endorse. They're just things that through my practice I found have worked. And also I have a track called Gentle Sleep Music for Babies, which is actually by my husband, who's a musician, which is available on basically everywhere that you can download music. So if you have a Spotify is free, for instance, you can listen to it for free as a sample on Amazon. Do not buy the whole album if you go for this music. Get one track and play it on repeat all night or all nap time. Lots of people make the mistake of playing like a lullaby CD or a YouTube playlist. It's really important that your baby goes to sleep to the same sound or piece of music that they went to sleep to, because remember that going past go, if they wake up and it's on a different piece of music, then that's actually alerting. So for those with 0 to 3, so all of you, the first 3 tracks on the album, tracks 1, 2 or 3, those first 3 tracks are for you, and we want to play it on repeat at a sort of gentle background level. And the final thing I want to say for questions is everything I've spoken about today is in my Gentle Sleep book and more. It covers all the way up to 5-year-olds. So if you have specific questions about nap schedules, routines, or, you know, night feeds and how to try and reduce them as your baby gets older, or how to move away from bed sharing, then you'll find all the answers in there. Please, please, please double check that you get the new edition, the one with the coloured stars on the front that says revised and updated. The first of the edition of of the book, which has no coloured stars, is a very, very different book. It's going to tell you why your baby doesn't sleep, but it won't tell you what to do about it. But the new edition has lots of hints and tips that will help. So if you get it from Amazon, the only seller on Amazon who will have the new edition is Amazon themselves. So if you do get it on Amazon, go through and it will say something like 27 options to buy. Click through all of them, and for the new one, I think it's about £10 in the UK, and it will say sold by Amazon and dispatched by Amazon. If it doesn't say that, it is not the new edition. It's discount booksellers selling the old edition. The same with eBay. Amazon in the US, again, make sure it's Amazon sell it. If you're elsewhere, then the book depository should have the new edition. If it's a cheap edition, if it's a cheap version, I can guarantee you it's booksellers selling the old version. And as I say, that book is, I completely rewrote it a couple of years ago, and it's a really different, not remotely anywhere near as helpful book. But I'm going to leave all of that with you now and pop you back to me and have a quick look through some of the questions. So what I should say is I'm only taking questions about 0 to 3 months, because that's what our webinar is about. Obviously, for questions with older children, then that will be answered in my book. I also actually have a webinar. If you have babies 4 months or older, I actually have a webinar next weekend, which still has a few spaces. If you go onto my website and click workshops and webinars, you can find the link to that there. All right, so a question here. My 10-week-old sleeps for 1 6-hour block per day. Is there any point in waking him during the day to try and get it to happen at night? Or is that just trying to teach circadian rhythms? Do you know what? I would just never wake a baby. Just leave them to it. So 10 weeks, you'll probably start to see this naturally change in the next month, in the next sort of 2 to 4 weeks. For now, I wouldn't worry about it. What I would be focusing on is making sure in the daytime, everything is very, very light. I wouldn't keep it, you know, I wouldn't try to do anything to encourage that 6 hours. So I would make sure if you are playing alpha music or white noise or something like that, I would stop that. And I would just have, you know, everyday loud household noises around. And at night, again, it's very important that everything is very dark. So focus on tweaking the environment, but no, I would just leave them. I'm really not a fan of waking babies, and I think you'll start to see a big change in this coming up in the next couple of months. Okay, my baby is 12 weeks and still wakes every 2 hours. Is that normal? Oh my word, is that normal? I think there are people now watching this who are like, oh my goodness, you have a 12-week-old and you get 2-hour stretches. We hate you. That is so much more than our 45-minute stretches. Yes, it is really, really, really normal. And actually, I think a little bit better than normal. What I would point out is that I would say in the next month or two, don't be alarmed if they start to wake a little bit sooner. You may have a nice sweet spot of a month or so where you may get 3 or 4 hour stretches. But remember when I said 4 or 5 months, you tend to have a dip in that roller coaster. And again, at about 6 months when they wean onto solids. Remember, baby sleep is not linear. So it's normal, it's fine. I'm sure you're doing a great job. Please, please don't worry. But you will find there's that roller coaster as well. And also, do I provide independent support? Yeah, you know, I do. And I did. It's incredibly intense. So what I do is try to make most of the information I can give available either for free on stuff like this or in my book is by far the cheapest way. There's nothing magical I withhold to private support. You will find everything I talk about in my book. The only difference is that I kind of do all the investigating work for you. But so my website is gentlesleeptraining.co.uk. However, I am not offering any support until spring 2022 because I'm currently writing 2 books. And when I write, I have to unfortunately focus solely on the writing. So my 12-week-old thrashes violently when trying to get off to sleep. She looks like she is drifting off, then will thrash her arms and wake herself up. She can roll onto one side, so I don't think we could swaddle her anymore. So yeah, I would be really careful about the swaddling. I would be, 2 things I would look at. Well, actually, yeah, 2 things. The first is there any physical discomfort? So could there be a bit of torticollis? Could there be a bit of stiffness or something there? Could there be any abdominal discomfort? So maybe with something like the microbiome or feeding. So is there discomfort? Sometimes thrashing around is a baby's way to deal with pain. And the other thing I think about is, are you trying to get them to sleep before they're ready to sleep? So if they're not ready to sleep and they're not tired enough, sometimes there'll be lots of shifting and moving around, just like we would do. So I'd be thinking, can I maybe try to put them to sleep a little bit later? Or maybe sometimes if you're holding them to sleep, will that help? Okay, so Sleep environment, summer baby. Should we prioritize darkness or coolness at nighttime? Always darkness. Darkness is the most important thing to prioritize. So they've just said they can't open their window without letting in light. So pick between dark or cool. So absolutely prioritize dark. Cool is good to get.